The first Friday of September. This is Heidi Hatch with KUTV 2 News for the Take 2 podcast this week. Maura Carabello in the house from the Exoro group, and Tyler Clancy, a representative off the Hill today, doing some legislative work. Thanks so much for coming in, both of you. Another week where we started off and it was one day and I'm like, maybe there's going to be nothing to talk about. Again, I was wrong. And some of it is just, I feel like we're getting into the crazies of before the election. And I'm like, are we even talking about this? But it hasn't stopped. Like, I feel like we need to put, those on the job signs that are like, it's been 200 days since we've had an accident. I feel like we need to start doing that. Yeah. It's been, 0 weeks since something unexpected hasn't happened in politics.
We would have had to be resetting it almost every week.
We would be at 0 for 2024 so far. I'm going to give it one of those signs in here. That would be fun. And it's happening both locally and nationally, which is the interesting thing. And I know that there's always an October surprise, so it's really going to have to knock my socks off to surprise me this year. I'm like, what's it going to be? So we will stay tuned for that. The breaking news today, though, there's been a lot going on with Constitutional Amendment D, and the legislative session put that on the ballot just recently. But today, I've been following along with other people's tweets because I get in the afternoon and just catching up. But apparently the plaintiffs in the redistricting lawsuit that went before the Utah Supreme Court, they're now asking the Supreme Court for an emergency halt to stop the ballot language of Amendment D from appearing on the ballot. They say that the way it's been written, it's not accurate, it misleads voters, and they won't understand exactly what it's about. Whether or not the court takes it up is the question right now or not. I actually had a statement, too, as well that came from... I believe Mike Schultz put it out a little bit earlier today. Now I've got to find it. But while I'm finding that right now, you were obviously, Tyler, in the legislative session. This was passed. And I think a lot of people at home are watching this and thinking, are they trying to pull something on us? What's happening? I don't understand it. What's your take on Amendment D?
It's a great question, and that is top of mind for a lot of my neighbors that I talk to.
Are they mad at you, or are they like, oh, I love this, high five?
Just depends on the neighbor.
Yeah.
But I think, too, when I talk to people, a lot of times I try and bring it down to, the simple and kind of, here's how it works in the legislature. Many times we'll pass a bill 75-0 in the House, and it'll pass 27-0 in the Senate, and it's signed by the governor. I would say that's kind of the will of the people. But then maybe 2 years down the road or whenever it might be, there's tweaks, there's amendments, and many times we repeal legislation every year. So for me, the reason that I'm supportive of Amendment D is to make sure that we have the flexibility to adapt and change to the changing times while still understanding that if you don't like how the legislature works, there are those elections, there's that backstop. But with an initiative, if you don't like how it goes and the legislature can't change it, who do you point your finger at? So I think, to me, that's when I bring it down to the people to that level. A lot of my neighbors who maybe originally did not support it end up appreciating why that's important.
I think the one word that concerns a lot of people is repeal, that you can just do away with the will of the voters. Is that the intent of this law?
Well, I think you just look broadly at what do we deal with every single year? Mental health, homelessness, food security issues, which I know we'll talk about later. Many times I think we've seen massive movement or ideas swing the pendulum, and then that pendulum swings back. And so I think if we are going to repeal it, that there needs to be that backstop. And that's, for me, how I see it fundamentally, is that election piece, to make sure that you can hold those people accountable who are voting, yes or no on those legislation that impacts your life.
Maura, do you see the Supreme Court taking this case up again? They'd have to act quickly on this before we actually got to printing the ballots and this getting on there right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna narrow our focus for a second. Tyler rightly so answered the question, and the question was about the merit of it.
If you're watching right now, ignore me because I'm going to move his microphone so we can see both your faces.
But we were talking about sort of the answer was well served with what's the merit. Or what's the case for support of that? Really, we need to make sure that the relief is about the drafting. So those are slightly different things. So, as our listeners already know, I disagree with the merit in general of the bill because the ability to amend is already there. So really, the nugget there is the repeal measure. And remember, the Supreme Court also narrowly refined this to be bills or initiatives that are reforming government. And that speaks directly to why the backstop isn't actually elected officials. And the right to the initiative is constitutionally protected. So what's new in the Constitution is not the right to amend. What's new is the right to repeal. But actually, today's relief had nothing to do with that. Today's relief had to do with the fact that also in the 2024 session, the legislature took out for initiatives the need to have legal counsel be the drafters. And they, in fact, allowed the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate to be the drafters of initiative. And when the public and when these asking for relief saw the draft language, they felt like it wasn't accurate and it wasn't neutral, and deceitful is a word that's been used. And some Republicans have actually jumped into this. This isn't a necessarily partisan issue. So the relief is specific to the language drafting. What I read also was an alternative to the Supreme Court asking that they just put the bill, the SJR 401, into the question. I mean, they said, why did you need to redraft this? The bill, to its credit, is about a page and a half, and it's pretty straightforward in its writing. There's two main components, the foreign money, and then this issue we're talking about, it amending and enabling and repealing. So the relief is about objecting to the actual draft language. So the reason I explained it for the long haul is this really always puts the courts, every last minute question about elections jams up the courts. Like, from my experience, most courts first look and say, sacrosanct is our ability to get a ballot out that's accurate that people can vote on. So they always hate when this is last minute. And if I remember right, I think that we're past maybe the generally held timeline of objecting. But as the relief measure asks for, September 20th is the printing deadline, and I think it's October 15th, which is when the ballot. Yeah. And these petitioners are suggesting that there is enough time for the courts to grant this alternative. And the alternative would be essentially, as those listening know, the underlying parts of the bill, the new part of the bill, that actually be the question that the voters see. So their objection was not the right to put this on the ballot. It was that the language was really poorly drafted. They feel like poorly drafted enough that it's worthy of the courts taking a look-see. So I don't know. I mean, it's a tough call for the courts. They have to assess whether the ballot, the election process will be interrupted. And man, what a bad year, because we've just spent 4 years talking about, is our election process screwed down tight enough? Do we have confidence in it? So they're going to have to weigh, does this undermine confidence? Does this clarify votes, clarify for the voter the right language? I mean, I will say, so that was sort of, if that's the responsible part, I was shocked by this language. Like,
the word strengthen the initiative process is what doesn't seem neutral to me.
So strengthen isn't neutral. And the fact that they omitted the word repeal is so irresponsible. So the heart of the matter has two foundations to it. One is this issue of foreign language or foreign entities contributing. Now, to be clear, this isn't in the Constitution. So the legislature could have put this into law when they called an emergency session. The legislature does not need this to be in the Constitution to apply this to. They could today, as they have actually with the candidate section, they could put this foreign entity law in today. So that's not really in practice. If voters are like, I really want this foreign entity, then go call your legislature and tell them to put it into law, because they don't need a constitutional amendment to do that. But the fact that they left out the word repeal, it's hard not to think that's a little janky.
Do you see that argument that the word repeal missing and the word strengthen isn't neutral and might be confusing to voters who are reading the question and think, oh, okay, well, this might be something different than I think?
That's a good question. I think this issue is going to be top of mind for a while, leading up to the election. I think that, everyone, and Maura talked about it, said, one of the best things you can do is read the law. And that's where I think people will get a lot of clarity of just, this is what it is. And it is tough, trying to boil things down to, boilerplate language. and obviously you want to make it your side favorable. But
you don't. That's why general counsel is required. So I've drafted a ton of language, and I've drafted a ton of language from a biased point of view, right? Like I've come in with a point of view. And often the protocol, what standard protocol is, the initiators, so let's say I'm a part of a group that initiated it, maybe it includes electeds, maybe it doesn't. The initiators often proffer the first draft. And the reason you give it to a legal counsel is they say, oh, good try, Maura, but supportive is not a neutral word. And the whole point of having legal counsel, which is something that the legislature took away. The whole point is, and legislative council does this all the time with individual legislators. The legislator sits down and talks about what they want to achieve. And then you require an expert in government laws to write it for you and say, well, Representative, this does achieve what you want, and this is good governance. And this allowed the proponents to just write it without any sense of neutrality. We are supposed to seek neutrality and clarity when asking the question. I mean, that is baked in. I've had many a legal counsel say to me, we thought these words were a little manipulative. We thought these words, and hey, my job is to try and get the best drafting possible. But when you took out the referee, when the legislature took out the referee, now you do have a biased party writing the language.
And so that, I think, is the big question. We'll have to see what the court says. I do want to read that statement that came from President Adams and Speaker Schultz today. They said, it's ironic that the very people claimed to advocate for greater voter engagement are the same ones trying to obstruct Utahns from having the opportunity to vote on this important matter. The plaintiffs are clearly concerned about leaving it to voters to decide. Before initiatives overwhelm and significantly alter our state, Utahns should have the opportunity to voice their opinions. So that was their reaction. I guess we wait and see what the courts have to say, but I believe this is probably going to end up on the ballot. And so the best way
But remember, they're not suggesting it shouldn't be voted on. They are suggesting that the language is biased. They're suggesting that you just put SJR 401 in, because I also agree with them. If you go read that, it's readable. I have had a million bills where I'm like, what does this say? And if someone is telling me a lie, I wouldn't know, because I can't read the bill. I don't understand it. It's too technical for me. This is not too technical for any voter. Voters are just as smart as any legislator. Why would you not just insert the law language when it is as plain spoken as this law is? That's what makes me a little suspicious.
Is there any chance you think maybe Speaker Schultz and President Adams would go back and redraft this at this point, or is this set in stone?
You know, I can't speak to that, but what I do think is obvious is the stakes that I feel people are feeling on this, right? The reason that it's at the top of the list, the reason that we're talking about, emergency injunctions and kind of this clash for influences, I think you do see that it's a significant policy enough to where you have your really progressive groups and your really conservative groups clashing over this, because I think it will be impactful.
Okay. But I will tell you, I don't think this is an ideological issue. In fact, if anyone should be worried, it's the Republicans. This is pretty aggressive. The other thing that no one's talking about is, so the heart of this is some of the pro argument is like, we're worried about being too initiative focused. If we want to talk about something that's happening in real time that is unprecedented, I noticed the media keeps getting the terminology wrong. We have 4 constitutional amendments on this ballot. 4.
That is a lot.
Our Constitution is supposed to be the recorder of last result. Frankly, because of what Tyler said earlier, you want the ability to progress, right? You only want to enshrine in the Constitution truly foundational principles, and then you want the legislature to kind of supplement the rest. And this legislative body is proposing 4 constitutional changes. There has not been a year for many a year which the legislature has not offered wanting to edit and amend the Constitution. I think that's extraordinary. I think the number 4 is extraordinary. We've never had that many initiatives. We've never had that many ballot measures. We've never had that kind of interference with the Constitution from any citizen. but we have a conservative legislature that is proposing 4 constitutional amendments. I'm not speaking to how heavy they are or right or wrong, but I do think voters should be
a lot of change.
Hypersensitive about constitutional amendments. I think they're worthy of scrutiny, whatever their subject is.
And we'll keep talking about those. Another thing people are talking about as we're heading up to the election is the Lyman campaign. And we all know at this point that Phil Lyman lost in the primary, but he's decided to run as a write-in. And his internal polling that he's released, if it's correct and isn't slanted, it's hard to tell with internal polling how correct it is. It looks like he has a snowball's chance, like not a great chance, but he's got some support. But interestingly enough, there are new Lymans who have just filed before the deadline for write-ins. Richard Kennedy Lyman and Carol Ann Lyman. I haven't figured out if they're married or family of some sort, but they're running on a ticket as unaffiliated write-ins for governor as well. The Lyman campaign believes that the Cox campaign went out and found them and put them on the ballot to be a spoiler so that if someone put Lyman on there, no one would know which Lyman, and then nobody gets the vote. Maura, where do you think this came from? I've tried to call, I've sent messages, but it is kind of weird. Is this someone who thinks they're funny? Did someone talk them into it? What is this?
I don't know. I'm going to be no fun on this answer.
Okay.
So like, it doesn't matter. Like I just from a political science assessment, the chances of being a successful write-in are so nominal that, I mean, I guess any news about this is probably good news for Phil Lyman, because any attention
talking about
to the write-in, because nobody remembers. Because remember, you have to register as a write-in, then you and I have to remember.
Yeah.
So yes, this messes up those whose game plan was not to remember Phil's first name and to only write the second name in Lyman. It's sort of either good fun or horrible process, depending on how serious it is. But I sort of can't get over my overarching response, which is I don't think Phil Lyman is in play in this election, because I don't think write-ins are in play in gubernatorial elections. And if you look at Cox's numbers, both in likability and in vote for likeliness, he's doing just fine. So I hope it's not the Cox campaign, because that lacks discipline that he just doesn't need. But the reason I'm no fun is it doesn't matter either way. I don't believe that he has a serious attempt at writing in.
What do you think?
You know, it was. I even was thinking the same thing. The past couple legislative campaigns where there's been write-in, really even with some significant energy, I haven't seen the success there.
It's not an easy thing to do.
It's not an easy thing to do, especially, you know, when you get that ballot and you're, you know, voters who might not be as engaged throughout the primary process. Like I always say this, if someone is really dedicated and wanting to vote in Phil Lyman, I don't think they'll be confused about who they're going to write, whose name they're going to write down. It did make me laugh a little bit. I was trying to find the year, but when John F. Kennedy first ran for Congress, it was a really big race, and I think there was some very simple name like John Smith or something was running against him, and the rumors is that his father recruited several other John Smiths to file for that same election, you know, kind of that. I think that's what people think about is that, you know, tricky tactics, but who knows? I mean, you know, reality is stranger than fiction sometimes. Yeah. And there's always that, you know, someone could have said, hey, maybe I'll ride this wave and see how many votes I can get for governor. Who knows, I guess, to agree with
Maura. When Tyler and I decide to do this, when we decide to mess with it, one thing I would say is, so for those of you who are thinking about it, don't put 3 names, right? Just put one. Like, make it easy. So you may next time, if you're siblings or if you're married, just like maybe go last name. Because the more complicated you make it, the easier it is to toss
Pare
that.
it down. You don't need your middle name.
So I'm also just like, don't leave your middle name out. Don't make it complicated.
But like, it was Kennedy for the middle name, so you want to throw that in. To confuse it a little more. Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing is it might be someone who, I mean, is involved in politics and just decided to throw their name in there, because when I found his Facebook page, which I think is the correct one, he lists himself like as his title, is it Libertarian Unicorn or something like that?
Wow.
And so it's someone who obviously thinks about politics and posts otherwise. I tried to be his friend so I could see what he posts.
And?
Other than publicly. Last time I checked, we're not friends yet. So,
Stay tuned.
Still stay tuned to
got a
that.
couple more topics, so who knows?
I know.
We're going to be following this race closely.
I know. It's just like, I feel like we sort of live in bizarro world. But I do think that Lyman's campaign is having fun with this. And I don't know if they're having fun. They seem stressed out by it. But it definitely has people talking about it. Also, dealing with the Lyman campaign, the state auditor's office is just one of 2 audits that are happening. And he came out earlier this week saying that his audit was complete. They looked at 3 different candidates' votes and went through them. And he said, after selecting a random sample of signatures, our team worked diligently to review the validity of those signatures. During that process, I personally reviewed each of those 2 sampled signatures from the Cox-Henderson campaign. I noted 4 exceptions from our primary sample of 373 signatures. We then asked signature validators to perform a validation of previously uncounted signatures that had been received before the submission deadline. That was to see if, let's say they didn't have enough, if their other batch would have been good enough. And bottom line, he says, statistically, it was likely that each of these candidates met the statutory threshold of required valid signatures. Tyler, does this clear up everything for you when you're looking at this race, or should it for voters?
I didn't have any questions about could Governor Cox get the requisite amount of signatures. Obviously, someone that's been in statewide office, has run for these campaigns before. But I'll tell you that, in my opinion, any audit, especially of something as important as our elections, I'm all for it. I think sunshine is the best disinfectant. You think about running a really great company, so we're downtown in the heart of our capital city. A lot of these really strong companies, they want auditors to come in and open up the books and see what's going on. When they get that confirmation from an outside, in this case it was the state auditor looking at our election systems, to me that strengthens my faith in the election process, and I hope it does too for individuals who maybe did have questions.
And I thought it would, Maura, strengthen people's perception of how well our elections are done. But then when you look at the Lyman campaign followers, they're like, well, why did they just pick 373? Why didn't they go through every single vote? But that's how an audit works.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of why I don't know how successful this will be in persuasion. But I feel like this falls under the moniker of an abundance, maybe even an overabundance of caution, because we're in an era of questioning elections. And so I'm sort of split on, I get the strategy of saying, in a year where that's in question, we're going to do as much showing you that we've really reviewed this as possible. The flip side of that is you start to do these machinations as a communications exercise, not as a real deterrent to a real problem. We don't have a problem with our elections. We have audits built in. In addition to that, a couple of years ago, Speaker Schultz ran a piece of legislation that added another mandatory audit. At that point, you could maybe say, okay, that's just a nice backstop. Now we've added to this particular conversation 2 more audits. So at this point, I want to see the taxpayer bill, because I'm like, I think I do see the necessity of having the conversation with people about the safety of it, because it's what's in the public zeitgeist right now, and particularly for Republicans, because it tends to be right of center who's challenging the security of elections. But I do see it as a communications exercise. I think we've gone well beyond necessity in terms of safeguarding. Now, I'm not speaking to the validity of it. Like, I think the frugal Dougal, as we would expect of him, took a statistical approach, pounded it out, dotted his I's, crossed his T's. We're going to wait for another one from the legislative auditors. But I think at this point, it falls a little bit into political machinations for me, because how many times I also, from a political consulting point of view, you said what I believe, which is those who do not believe we have free and fair and safe elections are unpersuadable. They are not going to move off of it. It's a conspiracy that will not go away to a certain group of far right. And so if that's who you're trying to appease, like, go help some kids do something, because those people are not going to be appeased.
Well, I totally agree with you about John Dougal. And we saw in his congressional campaign, John is willing to speak his mind, and he's not going to, really pander to one group or another. And that's why I think makes him so special as an auditor. I'm definitely going to miss him. I'll tell you, though, I do think that people can be persuaded. I live in Provo, and right next to 2 blocks away from my district is the Utah County Election Center. And every year, I have neighbors or constituents and certain delegates that maybe not flat out say this was a stolen election, but say, can you help me understand this? Because I don't really understand. In Utah County, our election center is actually open for tours. Hosting some of those tours has been some of the most impactful events I've ever hosted. Seeing the physical election security, seeing the technology, seeing the kind of the backstops, as you mentioned, it really can. I think if someone has heard different things on media, seeing it, asking those questions, and just kind of opening it up to say, "Hey, ask away. We can show you." I've seen people's opinions change and really have that strength brought back.
100%. I mean, if you don't trust what's going on, sign up to be a poll watcher. Because you will feel so good about the effort put in.
It's hard.
It's really hard. It's really detailed. It's really earnest. It's really American. Like, if you feel good about our election process, the closer you get to it.
Why do we think that Phil Lyman has been so frustrated by this election? Because, I mean, he's obviously frustrated. He's running as a write-in now. He still believes that, he needs to see some of those signatures that he hasn't. He's won elections before and everything seemed to be fine. Is it because he won the caucus and he feels like the caucus should be the only system? Or do we have an idea of why this is happening? Either of you?
Well, I'll tell you, I've served with Representative Lyman, and he is someone who's willing to stand on principle. He's willing to be one no vote across the board. I can't speak to what his arguments are at the election. I know he does feel that the caucus system should reign supreme over a primary because of the threshold of the percentage he got. But I can't speak to what exactly his concerns are with that. But I can tell you from a personality standpoint, he's totally willing to stand alone.
Yeah, I mean, listening to him, the ideological through line for him seems to be that the parties and the caucus system should be the prevailing, and he hates that has not been supported by the larger legislative body nor by the court. I mean, like that. I think it's just an ideological difference, and he is now in a position to object to it personally. Like, he's in that position. He's been running for something and he isn't afraid. I think you also have to always give a nod to the dimension of he is someone who also does not hate the spotlight.
Sometimes it's fun to be a star.
Sometimes it's fun.
Yeah. Another thing that has been in the headlines this week is school lunch. And I feel like this has been an issue kind of for the last couple of months. It came up again recently when a young boy in West Haven died, that his school lunch ladies had been trying to feed him. The family said no, and then he ended up getting pulled out of his school, and they believe dying partially because he wasn't being fed enough starvation. It's brought up the school lunch cases that we've been talking about. There's also been large deficits in some of our districts. So this week, the governor said that he's excited to announce that he's redirecting $1.2 million from the American Rescue Plan into a new grant program, so schools can now apply for reimbursement. I believe that the amount of debt right now is probably triple that, but it's $1.2 million that will put a dent in it. The interesting thing, first off, this to me was that I'm surprised we still have American Rescue Plan dollars, because COVID's long been over with, and it's what we complain about, that kind of fed all that cash into the system and created inflation, which is another problem that we could talk about for another day, but that money still exists. Maura, it's going towards school lunches. Is this a good use of the money, or is this just a drop in the bucket and it doesn't really fix the problem?
So a nod to federal money, depending on how we've categorized it, we actually have until the end of 2026 to spend it. And if you don't spend it, you lose it. So yeah, I mean, I think that, and the governor knows this and the supporters know it. We all know this, so I am supportive of this. But the bummer is it's one time, right? The bummer is that, and I love how they've structured it as a grant. It all seems really smart. I saw Channel 2 last night ask the broader question of, do you support the notion of underwriting school lunch for everybody? It seemed, at least in
overwhelmingly,
the TV poll, that it was in the 80s in terms of people who did. This seems like a fundamental building block for an educational environment. We know so much scientifically now about the relationship between food and learning. So it doesn't seem superfluous to learning. It doesn't seem like a handout. It seems like it's fundamental. I think that Utah is clever enough that as we evolve next year, I would like to see some dimensions in which I've seen this done more effectively locally, but where there's a public-private partnership and I'm a family, I think we should offer it equally because it takes away stigma. And stigma's the problem with kids who need food. And so I think we take away the stigma, but allowing private contributions, I think, is a way for me as a citizen who wants to engage to say, yeah, I will contribute. I will do it quietly. It's not about me contributing. That's going to just be something I can exercise. So I like this philosophy. I like where it's going. I like that it's being led by Republicans because nationally it makes it a nonpartisan issue. We won't even go into the Tim Walz category because it's too political. But I will say I think Governor Cox has always been good about these human needs. And I shouldn't speak as much because Representative Clancy is knee deep in this issue. But I do think for me what is really important is that food and learning are really closely related.
Okay. So I want to start with you with the first question of, is this a good idea to transfer this $1 million and use it towards the debt? First of all, do you see that as a good move for the governor?
Absolutely. I was thrilled when I saw Governor Cox's announcement and speaking to members in his cabinet to see his vision to what he said, this is a human need, this is an education need. To contextualize that $1.2 million, we in Utah on the state level, we spend over $7 billion on education every single year. You would be hard pressed to make the case to me that we ought to spend $7 billion in education, but we shouldn't fund pencils or pens, right? It's so essential, as Maura said. Food is no different. In fact, for me personally, it's way above pens and pencils. If I'm hungry in a meeting at work, I'm not going to be able to focus. We talk about children who are coming from homes, and we're looking at anywhere from 130 to 180% of the federal poverty guidelines. There are already some challenges that they're experiencing. And now if they're without breakfast or lunch because they can't afford that, in many cases, it would be 40 cents a meal for a reduced price lunch. That's a bigger problem. The $2.8 million of school lunch debt, that's just a symptom of the problem. And so I've spoken with Governor Cox and his team, and they're committed to A, figuring out that debt problem, but also B, as Maura alluded to, finding a solution that gets to the heart of the issue, getting upstream so we don't see nearly $3 million of school lunch debt.
Has anyone ever looked at the debt to look and see if it's just parents forgetting? Because I know sometimes I would get warnings from my kids. I'm like, oh, shoot, they've been out of money and I didn't realize it. Where it's people who simply can't afford it or parents that are just busy and life happens and they don't pay for it? Or does it even matter, bottom line, when you're trying to make sure the kids are fed and they're not hungry?
So what I found in working with Utahns Against Hunger and other groups, the American Heart Association of Utah, we found that a large portion, leaning on 80% of that school meal debt at the end of the year, is from families who are already on the reduced price category. So think about a family who might not be able to afford 40 to 80 cents per meal that stacks up over a school year. These are families that are in hard times. I think really it's a realization that families that we maybe considered middle class for many years are now feeling the squeeze more than ever, and especially at the grocery store.
So you're looking at ways that the legislature could fund meals. Is there a bill written up? What are you hoping to accomplish, and how much would it cost?
Absolutely. So last year, I ran a request for appropriation to do just that, to eliminate the reduced price category in our free and reduced and make Utah a state where we say, if you're within this umbrella, it's going to be no cost. Understanding that people have been more of a challenge at the grocery store. In rural Utah, the price of a healthy meal has gone up over 70% within the past 4 to 5 years. That's a significant increase when you're talking about someone who's working an hourly wage. So what our legislation is looking at, and we're going to have some exciting developments in the next couple of weeks, but we're looking at creating an ongoing funding stream to eliminate that reduced price category and also increase access. We've talked to families who qualify for these programs, but because the sign-ups and the process of getting involved in this, the assistance that we as a state have already said, you qualify for, we want to help you, we're already funding it, but government's getting in the way. We want to make sure that we can eliminate that bureaucracy to help people get what they need without that stigma that Maura talked about.
Okay. And so what you're looking for, there would still be some people who paid for school lunch then. So you'd cover people who had just the reduced lunch. Is that what you're saying?
For now, that's what we're looking at, and this is the center mass of when we look at that school meal debt. We believe that we can get upstream so that the debt doesn't accrue year after year to the tune of several $1 million. But by getting up front, we can get ahead of that by making the system, the structure of this social safety net that we already have in place, we've already invested in. Let's make sure it actually works for those families who need it.
Okay. Is that something that you see working, Maura?
I do. I mean, I think it's all about the details always with these. The other thing that I think we need to start talking more about to our legislators, particularly ones who are willing to innovate, is that what you want to see is a bias towards action. You want to see a legislator who will go in and start the process of change, and then you want to support them when we learn something year one and they change it. So what I like is that we take bold, swift action, and then we do support our legislators in saying, lessons learned, here's how we're going to change how this works. And for me, dialing in a premier program that's not cut and copying something from another state, because I do think Utah's unique in many of our family units. We're unique in our wage structure. We're unique in the diversity of the languages that we speak. And so I think there's going to be lots of rooms. I would rather see us be bold and then amend than us to be incremental, because the incremental changes don't get rid of, as Tyler said, that we know that there are two or three fundamental bureaucratic obstruction problems. Can we just blow those bad boys up and then let's start to put it back together? But if you do too incremental, you never actually blow up the problem.
That is interesting to see. And this isn't really related, but I'm just looking at families' needs. But I know for a long time we kind of got into the realm of thinking that half-day kindergarten was normal and what families wanted here in Utah. And then as soon as the offering of full-day kindergarten was on the table, we've seen how many families of uptake have taken it because they've needed that child care, or it's just been a need. And it was quick. It wasn't like an incremental where families were like, oh, maybe I'll try it. It was like, okay, yes, please give it to us. So it's been interesting to watch. So if this happens, I'm assuming this would be in the February legislative session, probably wouldn't go into practice till the next school year.
So we're looking at all options. We're trying to see how swift we can be in taking this challenge on. I will tell you that as I've kind of worked in this space for the past, year and a half of kind of trying to do fact finding, talking to families who are on the poverty line or kind of teetering on that edge, talking about what are some of those challenges. But also, I'll tell you, the private sector, there is so much interest in the private sector in Utah to solve this problem, but they don't want to invest in just paying off debt. They want to get behind a solution that really gets to the heart of the issue, gets to those root causes so we don't see the debt down the line. Even things as simple, when we talk about stigma, there are different programs we can look at about putting in a number, and that way there's no delineations. And, you hear these heartbreaking stories of children who, hey, you've got to carry the blue tray because you're on the free lunch, or some of these delineations.
They really have different color trays? How did I not know this?
This is years ago. But still, I mean, they're so impactful that we still think of that. So there are ways that we can really be creative with this. But to your point, it's challenging, it's tough, but we've got to do something.
Is anybody opposed to this?
And
I'm sure someone is. Is there a group of people that would object to this?
I'm not sure. Group-wise, I think when people understand the concept of hungry kids cannot learn, it makes sense. When you contextualize, for the request for appropriation I ran last year was $3.5 million. It sounds like a big number, but when you contextualize it with a $7 billion education budget, it's almost a no-brainer.
Yeah, I don't even think it sounds like a big number. I mean, that's the thing is the percentage of this for the solve. If you're looking at ROI,
right?
Yeah,
all of the dumb stuff we do and how expensive desks. I mean, I'll do the easy peasy, like the administrative costs of even forming offices or doing FF&E. This is so consequential. And even if it was a full-on price tag, it's not that much. Like, you never hit the B word. You never even hit, like, you compare it to infrastructure, you compare that to other necessities. I mean, I'm not trying to diminish those, but it just seems to me what's really beyond ideologically compelling. What's really compelling is the ROI on the price tag. Like, it just seems, again, I don't want to be flippant with any taxpayer money, but the total solve in this is still in manageable debt numbers. And there's no reason to actually do debt. I mean, I think there's no reason to not do a direct appropriation. And then, as the representative said, why would you not view this as a capitalistic opportunity to offset with private? So that's the innovation. So the norm is the appropriation, but the innovation comes in with the private match. And like, that seems so much more forward thinking to me.
Are there specific companies that are willing to do a match right now that you've been talking to?
I don't want to ruin anyone's thunder.
Yeah.
But
let's give them their number.
Yeah, you're right. I'll tell you this. Think of a family who's at 185% of the poverty line. So for a family of four, a little bit under $50,000 a year. So this might be someone who's working an hourly job, maybe at a restaurant, and then they're picking up hours somewhere else. These are the families that every single paycheck is really dialed down. They are accounted for. The ironic part is that right now, the way that our system is set up, let's say that a family that's right on that level, right on that edge, picks up some overtime or gets a raise, 50-cent an hour raise, might not, be able to buy a new home, but it might price them out of those programs. So you have someone who's paying that 40 cents for 3 kids who are in school, 40 cents for breakfast and lunch, and all of a sudden it goes up to about $5 a meal. That's a pretty big difference when you think about over a school year. These are the kinds of stories that when people hear it, they understand the human impact behind the policy.
But okay, just to go one more lever though. I mean, what we do know of this demographic is a lot of the challenges also live beyond income. They live at education level, participating in complex systems, having access to technology, having access to translators. So a lot of times, I mean, I will personalize this. I am so glad I don't have kids in high school anymore, because I have pages and pages of contact sheets that just name these 73 logins I need to log into to tell you it's okay that she goes on this field trip. I mean, I'm telling you, having kids in school is complicated, and there's a lot of software involved and a lot of forms and a lot of emails and a lot of, so when we talk about bureaucracy, there's your income level, which is a really critical component. But I also think we have to be realistic about there are life obstacles in the way of this particularly group of families who don't find it accessible and intuitive, and we're having them do all this machination for bureaucratic reasons, not for help reasons. So in addition to the unfairness of them crossing a line that is a monetary line, we still have challenges with them accessing a needlessly complicated system.
And I can tell you that so many times I've fallen into this myself, where I say, those families or those people, I'll tell you, they're in our neighborhoods. Yeah. They're us. Yeah. We are as a community, I think about that pioneer spirit that really helped create the Utah that we know now. Of course, it's that rugged individualism of the strong, pioneer spirit, but absolutely it was also that philosophy of no one left behind. Yeah. And when you see a home where the cabinets are empty, or you see a kid like Gavin Peterson digging through the garbage, trying to find food to eat, that's when you know we've got to do something.
Okay, we're going to be keeping close tabs on that. I know a lot of families care about it in Utah. I want to mention really quickly, last week we were saying that Trump made the right choice by not coming to Utah. Maura advised him to stay away, go to the swing states, but he is dropping in.
He's coming for the ATM.
He is coming for the money. Maybe they could donate to the school lunch program as well. It's Saturday, September 14th. Or you could drop in. Do you have plans to be there?
If they let me in, I'll be there, and I'll certainly share the message and tell them about our initiative that we're.
Let me tell you what this is going to cost, though.
It's not cheap.
It is not cheap. It's like, what, $500,000?
$500,000 per person if you want to be on the host committee.
It's what, $3,300 if you're just a lowly individual.
If you want to co-host, $150,000, $35,000 if you want to have a photo.
Yeah,
with the president.
Mine are At least half or less than that. So
there you go.
photo with me.
See,
Exactly. And an autograph, and you can have dinner.
$1.50. And if you just want to show up and just be in the same room as former President Trump, $3,500 or $3,300. So anyhow, up to $10,000. Kind of depends.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say good news for the Democrats. He needs money enough to come to a solidly red state. That's going to be my spin on this.
That's your spin
That's
on
what I'm
this.
sticking with this. I'm sticking with that.
And last but not least, finally, I hope this is not the only presidential debate, but coming up on the 10th, the next Tuesday is the presidential debate. I'm glad it's happening. I'm going to be sad if it's the only one. I'm still sad that we're not having the one here in Utah. We're paying attention to that. And you reminded me, Maura, that we've got the gubernatorial debate going on this week as well. So a whole lot of debating, and people can listen and figure out where they want to be if they haven't already.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's also the only gubernatorial debate, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be cool. You look at President Trump and Vice President Harris. We've both lived under a President Trump administration. We lived under a Biden-Harris administration. I'm excited for the former president to really draw that contrast. And I think people are going to be excited to hear the difference in the exchange of ideas on the stage.
Do you believe that President Trump has a chance at winning, or does Kamala Harris have all of the momentum right now heading into, because she's the new shiny toy heading into November?
I certainly think President Trump has a chance of winning re-election this year, in 2024. And I'll tell you, the biggest thing is, kind of as I mentioned before, people have seen the record. We've lived under a Trump administration, and sometimes I think the doom and gloom headlines and the really bombastic things, it kind of falls flat when we say, well, I actually remember 2019 and it wasn't all that bad. And so I'm excited to vote for President Trump, I think
I don't have
he
that
will.
recollection.
You don't have that same excitement.
Maybe I just don't have a very good memory, but that is not what I'm longing for. I am interested. The debate this year. So we all loved debates, right?
Yeah.
But we're not normal. Like we're not.
We're all messed
we're
up
not
in our own
balanced and
special
happy
way.
people. But I do think more. I'm going to say normal people are watching. So I think it's going to be very telling.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch, and I don't know what it is. I hope they talk real issues and don't just talk about you suck and you suck, because I like the exchange of ideas, and I think they're both smart people with smart ideas. So I would like to hear some of those instead of just vote for me because the other guy sucks or the other girl sucks.
But like what I've read the most press about leading up to it is the microphone debate.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, that doesn't bode well for some
Who wants
deep
to
thought.
dunk on the other?
I know. I just want to be like, both of you grow up. You're interviewing to be the most powerful leader in the free world. Put your big boy panties and big girl panties on and just go do the debate. I believe in both of you. And you can shout loud enough and you'll end up in the other person's microphone if that's really needed.
It's true.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming in here. I'm sure there will be more excitement that we haven't even thought of yet happening next week. So thanks so much for listening, and thanks so much for coming in this week.